Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh. Thank you, Dr.
وعليكم
Ali.
السلام.
Very, very kind of you. Dr. Khalid, commend you for setting up this session. Commend wholeheartedly the two learned, illustrious scholars of ours for dealing with such a sensitive topic in such a mature and scholarly fashion. Now, I have a few observations, a few comments, food for thought, and maybe they may entail questions as well. Now, first and foremost, the Quran says, and both our esteemed speakers actually concluded on that note, "Inna dhanna yughni min al-haqqi shay'a," that speculation does not avail in the least when it comes to establishing the truth. So what we do not know, we need to assert that this is not known fully. Now, the 2 billion Christians of the world firmly base their belief on the crucifixion of Nabi Isa salamullah alayhi. But the Quran says, "Ma qataluhu wa ma salabuhu." They did not kill him, they did not crucify him. And then in Al-Bal shubbiha lahum, they have a bit of a complexity as far as that matter is concerned, and they do not have yaqeen. Allah says that in the Quran, yet 2 billion Christians at present and in their history swear by this theology and this historical occurrence and whatever else is based on that particular history that the Quran denies. So just because something is popular, until and unless there is surety, with evidence it can be proven, it should not be taken as a fact, nor can theologies be built upon it in terms of the wonderful communication of the Quran. Now, certainly, Bibi Fatima was offended greatly by Khalifa Abu Bakr and Khalifa Umar, and we find references to that within Bukhari and other literature. She was offended. But what was the nature of the offense? We do not know. As far as Khalifa Abu Bakr's statement is concerned, Lam Akshif an Bayt Fatima does not prove the burning of the door. It proves, yes, something has happened, some type of audacity was entailed, but the burning itself is not mentioned enough. What I would like to point out here is that within the Shi'i universe, then the khutbah of Lady Fatima Salamullah alayha also took place. Now, if the khutbah of Lady Fatima also took place, then that was presumably after miscarrying Mohsin and after the breaking of the door. Now, in that khutbah of Bibi Fatima within the Shia universe, Bibi Fatima does not hold back. She gives every form of argument and evidence, but never is the mention of the audacity of the door being burnt down being made in that khutbah. Nor do we find, or I'm asking, a direct sarih hadith from Imam Ali, Imam Hassan, Imam Hussein talking about this incident, and they were the first people involved at that point. I would be interested in knowing if the Sahaba like Zubair and Talha who were there, who were present in one form or another, either within the house or within the vicinity, have they narrated something like that? Another question that comes to my mind is that the notion of Sahih Hadith. In Kafi, we have many Sahih Hadith that talk about the incomplete nature of the Quran, yet we disregard them, because we compare them with other ahadith and circumstances and the sanad of the Quran itself. In Kamilus Ziyarat, I'm now posing a question here. When we say the hadith is sahih, are we bearing in mind that Kulaini calls his work sahih, but then it was much after all that commonly, not Kulaini might not call it, but we used to term Kulaini's collection as sahih. But it wasn't until the time of Allama Hilli that we had a quadruple division of our hadith, where we have Sahih, Hasan, Muwathaq, Da'if, so on and so forth. So I'm just saying, historically, when we categorize a hadith as Sahih, is that Sahih by the claim of that particular writer, or is it Sahih in terms of our evaluation of hadith? Anyway, these were my broad comments, and maybe they entail certain questions in there as well. Thank you.
Shukran jazilan. Thank you, Shaykh. So at least from what I can see, there's a couple of direct questions, which maybe first I'll give to Shaykh Vinay, and then maybe Shaykh Umar, if you want to have a comment, please feel free. So Shaykh Vinay, at least from what I've gathered from some of those insightful comments, I guess one of the questions was, how do we interpret the absence of any reference to such an incident within the famous khutbah Fadaqiyah? And could you respond to that and maybe give us some sense of the time frame? And then secondly, some questions about Kamil al-Ziyarat and how we recognize authenticity according to the Author's own standards, historical treatments of them, or contemporary assessments of them.
Yeah, that's a good question actually regarding, and that's something that I've been thinking about for a long time. The whole timeline here, I think, is a little bit blurry. But if we look at the khutbah known as khutbah Fadaqiyah, you know, the purpose of that khutbah was to assert the right of her right and the right of her husband, essentially, in that particular khutbah, and it does not make mention of any physical attack on her, or even when this exactly took place. There's no exact timeline either as to when it exactly took place in terms of a linear timeline. But what we do see in that, nevertheless, is like Shaykh Arif already mentioned, is extremely strong. So the language is very, things like this. So the language is, of course, very strong, but there is no reference. You're correct. There is no reference to an attack in the khutbah itself, and that's something that definitely has to be thought about as to why that is, and then how the timeline works as well in early Islamic history. Who knows, really, as I said, what happened first and what happened second exactly per se. I mean, in this case, it's when she found out that Fadak was being denied to her, she left, right? And she went towards the masjid. As for the Kamil al-Ziyarat, no, I didn't. My point was that the sanad in this case, yes, is sahih. The sanad, if you were to look at the various narrators here, and it's musnad to the imam, each one is linked to the other. So it would be from the later perspective, not from the perspective of Ibn Qawlawayh per se. But again, the whole issue of what is authentic and what is not authentic, I mean, depends on our specific epistemology in this regard, with regards to Kamil al-Ziyarat. But that's the answer to the question.
Thank you. Excellent. Shaykh Muhammad Umar, please.
Bismillah ar-Rahman ar-Rahim. What I would say is, I mean, the issue isn't regarding whether a controversial issue took place, because the whole episode after the death of the Prophet ﷺ is extremely controversial. The whole incident itself. We are saying, and this is the motion that's been put forward, is that Umar radiallahu anhu, who's extremely highly revered within Ahl Sunnah wal Jama'ah, even by many other people, that he physically attacked the daughter of the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam. He physically hit her by the door, and that resulted in her miscarrying. And I believe that if we want to do justice, then we cannot, with all due respect to my fellow learned scholars, we have to substantiate that incident with authentic narration that goes directly back to those who witnessed the incident. So, for example, when Mas'udi, who died in 346 after Hijri, when he narrates the incident that's apparently Abu Bakr regretted the violation of the door of Sayyeda Fatima, we know extremely that this narration is by Ibn Aisha, and her father is majhul. Her father is unknown in any of the books of Tahdith, in any of the books of Ilm Rijal. We don't know who this individual is. So we cannot use this as premises of saying this incident took place. Now, another point is the hadith. The only reference which is given is from Ibn Abi Shayba. Ibn Abi Shayba is the Imam of all four Imams of Hadith: Bukhari, Muslim, Abu Dawud, and Ibn Majah. He's an extremely well-respected scholar. However, his narration is extremely controversial simply because it's narrated from Zayd bin Abi. Zayd narrates from Aslam, his father. Al-Aslam was not physically present when this incident took place of the violation of the door of Sayyeda Fatima. So how could we say that this incident took place? It's mursal. He wasn't physically there. He, according to Ibn Hajar, radiallahu anhu, he says he came under the commandship or under the ownership of Umar in the 11th Hijri, after the Hajj, after the death of the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam, months and months after this incident took place. So what I would say is, yes, we have to debate it. There is a controversy. I agree with what Shaykh Arif says. There is a dispute among scholars that, yes, Sayyida Fatima salamullah alayha was upset with Sayyidina Abu Bakr and Umar. There was issues of differences about Fadak and so forth, about Khilafat, about even the leadership of Ali radiallahu anhu. That's substantiated. However, let me give you one point. The narration from Baladuri, and I'll finish off with this, in regards to Baladuri, the funny thing, and this is why I find this quite problematic, is that narration is extremely weak, Dr. Bhojani, on several different reasons. However, there's another narration after this in which it indicates that both Zubair and Ali and Abu Bakr reconciled with each other. And Imam Ali, alayhi salam, according to the narration, he describes Umar and Abu Bakr as men of Jannah, as people of Jannah. So if such an incident did take place, and that narration is more authentic than the so-called narration that Baladuri gives preference to. So if such an incident did take place, why is it that that narration is rejected, which is more stronger, and an extremely weak narration is accepted? So I think, the more debate has to happen. And finally, I would just say this, common sensely, Al-Hassan and Al-Hussein are there. Al-Hassan showed his real leadership in dealing with Muawiyah, in the fitna, in Jamal, in Siffin. Al-Hussein alayhi salam stood against tyranny of Yazid. He showed us how 72 human beings can stand up to dictators and so forth. So the question is, why did all of these individuals stay quiet when their mother was violated in such an extreme way? And that's the reason why I humbly believe, and I say this with respect, I believe our Shia brothers, they are very intelligent. But when it comes to this issue, I have to really disregard that such a, I call it a fantasy with all due respect. And it's what Sayyid Yusuf Al-Kohi said. Yes, it's narrated by the muballighin on the mimbars for certain agendas. But when you research it from both angles, it's not substantiated. Barakallahu feekum.
Thank you. Okay, so I think I have some comments and questions as well, actually, particularly following on from Shaykh Muhammad Umar. But before that, I see Dr. Amina Inloes' hand is raised. So would be very welcome, please, to ask your questions or make your contribution and comments, please.
Okay. Yes, it's nice to be here and it's nice to see you. Thank you very much for the presentations. I had a comment question for Sheikh Umar Ramadhan, not to ignore Sheikh Vinay's presentation, which was also very detailed and informative. And that is, I got the sense from your presentation that you're starting off with a premise that this did not happen and attempting to prove that. You mentioned some points regarding the sanctity of the person of the second caliph. And then you went through a very heavy critique of some historical narrations, which is fine. That's a reasonable way to look at history. But I just wanted to put it out there. I wanted to ask, is that the way that you approach everything in history, other details of Islamic history? And if not, then maybe it's not good to be selective and use this for one event, particularly because if this sort of thing does appear in the early texts and not limited to Shi'i texts, then perhaps that suggests that early Muslims did not have a problem talking about the idea, whereas today, because our doctrines have formed and we have certain assumptions about what certain sacred personalities would or would not have done, whether it's the second caliph, whether it's Hassan, Hussein, etc., we might be projecting some of our expectations onto what we think should be happening in history. But I think maybe in the past they were a little bit more open about talking about this stuff. And also, I think regarding Kitab Sulaim, of course, there's no reason to over-focus on it, as has been already brought up. It's something to discuss. But I think you might be overemphasizing the concerns of Shi'i scholars about Kitab Sulaim. You know, I mean, with all respect to, I think it's Professor Gleave, and I do respect him, but what he's saying there is not really a dominant Shi'i scholarly view on the validity and usefulness of Kitab Sulaim. I mean, if Sulaim ibn Qais was a pseudonym, it doesn't mean there wasn't some human being actually compiling the book. It came from somewhere. It just means he wasn't using his real name, which is even not unusual today. And while I'm not saying everything in Kitab Sulaim is correct, or maybe nothing is correct, God knows best, but you can't really dismiss the existence and earliness of the book as something to consider. So basically, I feel like you were maybe exaggerating a handful of criticisms and not looking at the more dominant view, which is that the book has merit, or at least in part has merit. But again, there's no need to focus on Kitab Sulaim. Thank you. That's all. I'll put my hand down now.
Thank you so much, Dr. Amina. Yeah, and lovely to see you. I think you're joining us from the States by the looks of it, or somewhere.
Yeah, Southern California.
MashaAllah. MashaAllah. So this is one of the benefits of us having this virtual setup. Although we miss the hospitality of the Institute and we miss the personal gathering, we're having the benefit of scholars joining us from around the world. So that's excellent. So, but I'll let Sheikh Muhammad Umar respond. And particularly, I think that if I could just emphasize one of the comments that Dr. Amina has made, very, very interesting comment, is she's saying maybe it wasn't so difficult to talk about these issues in early Islamic history. Okay, through our history, the existence of these reports, even in Sunni works. So does this suggest that we now consider it a more sensitive issue than it was? And does that reflect, if I add, does that reflect that sometimes maybe we're approaching these questions from a Sunni side as well, with a theological lens first and foremost, rather than a historical one? Please, Shaykh Umar.
Barakallahu fikum, Jazakallah khair. Thank you for the sister for a beautiful question. But one point that I would mention is that when I showed criticism of the book by Sulaim bin Qais, I also did say that many scholars do say that the book is authentic. And I actually mentioned 2 to 3 different scholars from Shi'i eminent scholars that rejected and that disagree with Sheikh Mufid and so forth. The reason why I quoted that book was to show that when you are speaking about such a great personality that over 1 billion Muslims love and honor and respect him, similarly to how we would respect Imam Ali and the Ahlul Bayt, that when you want to discredit him for doing something which took place in a historical context, then you cannot base it upon ihtimal. And clearly this book is doubtful. There's doubtfulness. There's uncertainty among scholars regarding its authenticity. That's the reason why I put that forth. Not saying that it's right or wrong, but to show that when a source has ihtimal, doubtfulness, we can't base our istidlal on that. That's from Ahl Sunnah wal Jama'ah. We want to base it upon something which is concrete, that this incident did take place. Now, I would use the same benchmark regarding any of the companions. And I actually say that it's more easier now to speak about historical events than in the past. In the past, it wasn't easier because of governments, because of certain reasons, because of certain caliphates that we had. Now, alhamdulillah, because of media, because of information is available everywhere. Everyone wants new information and new knowledge, and hence the reason why that information is more widely available today. Now, all I'm saying is that I use the same pretext regarding, for example, Yazid, that if I'm going to condemn him for killing Imam al-Hussein, which I do, rightfully I do, alhamdulillah, and I also follow the opinion that he is a non-Muslim based on Taftazani's view, then I want to use subjectively with evidence and not with emotion. So what I would say to our brothers and sisters, that if you see, this isn't an issue of khilafat, this isn't an issue of difference of opinion regarding being ma'soom or isma' and so forth. This is a major accusation against Umar radiallahu anhu, a very serious accusation that he physically assaulted the daughter of the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam. and hence no one did anything apart from having sabr. Hence the reason why I'm very critical, and hence the reason I took this approach to demonstrate, and I finish off with this point, to demonstrate to our viewers, to academics, to people who will read the papers, that irrespective of what theological differences or background you come from, when you approach this, it has to be approached from a critique view of what are the narrations and can we substantiate these narrations. I'm not denying certain things did take place. Fadak is one of them. I do believe that was wrong. Sayyida Fatima had right to that. I do believe that there was a lot of injustices towards the Ahlul Bayt, and we know what those injustices are. However, what I'm saying is that if you're going to put the notion forward that Umar did this, then I would say respectfully, you can't give me the aqwal of Imam Jafar as-Sadiq alayhi salam, or Imam Muhammad al-Baqir, or all of the other honorable 12 Imams who we also hold in extremely high regards. They're all Imams too. All the 12 Imams are all Imams. What I would say is you have to give us direct aqwal, authentic, rigorously authentic narrations that this incident took place. Jazakallah khair. Thank you very much.
Okay, so thank you for that response. Of course, I can see Dr. Khalid hand is raised, and I will again encourage all our colleagues and participants to raise their hands. I think despite the strength of that response from Sheikh Muhammad Umar, I think the question which I would have is how much, when we talk about historical incidents, to what extent do we have the type of evidence that you're searching for? I know that your concern here is this challenges another doctrine held by the Ahl Sunnah regarding the personality of the second Khalif, but it still raises the question: is that for historical events after the death of the Prophet, how many incidents can we capture which actually have that level of evidence? And maybe this is why Sheikh Vinay said that we can't have the definitive certainty as to whether these events took place. Although his emphasis, I think, at least based on having had the opportunity to have read the summaries which both of you provided, was that at the very least, I think it's important for us on this occasion to recognize the basis for this, as Sheikh Vinay put it, this collective memory. Okay, that there is this memory. And Sheikh Umar has pointed out that he doesn't accept, for the evidences he's provided, he doesn't accept that this specific incident took place. So my question to him would be, because our crowd is quiet, if you don't mind, Sheikh, my question would be that if we have this, so you're saying there is evidence that something happened, but because of whether you call it the tawatur or the Sunni theological premise about the status of Hazrat Umar, you're rejecting these traditions. Is there another way of reconciling the traditions to say that there was, as Sheikh Vinay put it, there was certainly some sort of dispute at the home? Would you concede to that extent based on your reading of the sources? Or does your theological position mean you have to reject any confrontation at the home of Hazrat Fatima?
The issue that we have within Ahl Sunnah wal Jama'ah, Ahl Sunnah wal Jama'ah differs deeply on this issue regarding the position of the Sahaba. Are we allowed to criticize them? Can we criticize certain things that they did? One view which is taken by some is silence. You don't mention the mistakes, and you don't mention the problems that took place between them, which is one view which is followed. The view that I followed of the Ghumariyun scholars from Morocco, Sayyid Abdullah bin As-Siddiq al-Ghumari rahimahullah ta'ala, is that you can critique them, but we don't believe in swearing or insulting, but we look at it from a critical angle. Yes, Muawiyah did make mistakes, major mistakes against Amir al-Mu'mineen, and you can't keep silent, and you cannot call it a khata ijtihadi. And the mistakes that, yes, Sayyidah Fatima was denied the land of Fadak, and that was her right. And you cannot just say it was a mistake based on ijtihad. That's really whitewashing it. However, what I would say is the unique thing that we do have is the science of ilm al-jarh wa ta'deel is so rigorous that we can't apply it in historical context. So we can look at narrations, and that's something which, even though he's infamous, Ibn Khetia did it to a large extent of a Tabri's tariq. He went through all the narrations, and I give credit to him, even though he isn't one of those scholars who I'd wholeheartedly support and quote a lot because of many of his nawasib views and anti-Ahlul Bayt positions. However, credit should be given that we do have a criterion, a benchmark of Jarh wa Ta'deel, and we can use that to say, is this narration authentic? Did this thing take place? If it's regarding a theological issue, then we would reject anything which is weak, because in our Aqidah, we don't take Khabar al-Wahid, we don't take Gharib. Shias differ with us on that issue. We take the qawl of the Ijma', whereas the Shias will take qawl al-Imam. The Imam's qawl is Hujjah, whereas the Ijma' doesn't exist in Shia theology. It will develop later on. But for us, what we would say is, if we want to base our Aqidah or base something that something took place, then it has to be based upon common sense, logic, evidences, and presenting them in a clear manner that such a thing did take place, and then having a debate upon. It's exactly the same thing saying about regarding Muawiyah. Did Muawiyah start the cursing of Amir al-Mu'mineen from the minbar? There's many narrations which are weak, which aren't authentic, but then there are other narrations which are rigorously authentic from the hadith, which substantiate it. So I think we need more debate. And also from another angle, obviously I only had 15 minutes, so please give me credit for that I couldn't come from a theological perspective or from an usuli perspective. What did the usuliyun say? Our usulis are clear, we don't fall ihtimal. So again, Jazakallah khair, and inshallah, I hope we can have more academic discussions on this subject and so forth.
No, we really appreciate your contributions. I'm only pushing you because I know.
Thank you. Barakallahu feekum.
So I see Dr. Khalid and then Shaykh Arif, and then I've also received a comment, a written question, which follows on to a certain extent from what we've just been talking about.
What I want to ask here out of interest is that the narrative of the door that is being presented from the pulpit by the Muballighin is a very detailed one, a fully packaged one. Now, I know we can't establish the historicity of the original event, but when we look at as an example, when we look at the narration of the details of the sacrifice of Imam Hussein, we find that historically there are many, many things that are missing in the very early literature, and subsequently they've been added on. And we see this happening for over 700, 800, 900 years. These additions to the whole narrative of Karbala and how the sacrifice took place were coming together before we got a fully packaged version of the events of Karbala, which we now narrate from the pulpit. Have you, from your work, seen a similar evolution in the narrative of the door historically that you find later sort of literature adding a bit more onto it than what was available within the very early literature?
It's a very good question. In my research, in my dissertation at Concordia, I focused only on sources up to At-Tabrasi, up to Sahib al-Ihtijaj. I did not go past him. And I really didn't even rely on, but mostly sources from the 3rd to the 5th century, which is basically the formative period of Shi'i Hadith. In the sources that we find from those, from that period, I think there are definitely some details, like the details of a nail, for example. I don't really know about that, to be honest. Again, I'm not criticizing, I'm not here, nobody take me, Shaykh Vinay is condemning Muballighin. No, I'm not doing that. I'm just simply saying that the early sources, I've not seen contain those things. There are certainly some things that are, become, added, or I wouldn't say added, but later details that are put on when I hear it from the pulpit. It's not always the actual riwayah that I shrined in the 3rd and the 4th century. So no, there are some. However, if we just stick to Ibn Khulaway, Al-Mufid, Ibn Rustum al-Tabari, Al-Kharajiki, Sheikh al-Tusi, and some of the early sources, even if we would accept part of Kitab al-Sulaim, as we know, it is debated, there's a discussion, Sheikh Puya has a discussion on it, but we leave that out. I think the details are enough that they're quite moving and they're quite emotional.
But
But,
others
you know,
are 300 years after the event, right? But Tusi and others are 300 years after the event themselves.
yeah, I'm talking about the isnads that they have going back to the imams themselves, right? Obviously, the whole Shia tradition is late anyhow. We're talking about, right? It all comes from the 4th century, essentially the 3rd and the 4th century going forward, right? So, as a part of that milieu of the development and the production of Shi'i hadith compilations, we find this event narrated within the broader context of the formative period of Shi'i hadith literature. In terms of its in terms of its compilation, it can be situated within that period of history. Yeah.
Can I ask something follow on? Because Sheikh Vinay has done a lot of extensive studies on this.
Go ahead.
Do they at all trace any of the riwayat from the Usul Arba'miya at all?
Yes, they do, because some of the narrators who have narrated this are also Ashab al-Usul. Yes, there is a correlation between Ashab al-Usul and the narrators of this incident. Yes.
Thank you. Thank you.
Thank you. Okay, so we'll come to, I see some other hands, alhamdulillah, which have been raised. So I'm going to come to, I only see your, unfortunately, for some people, I can only see their name as it appears on the Zoom. So if I don't recognize them, I may not be introducing them as they are, worthy of being introduced. But after Dr. Khalid, I think we'll go to Ali Sayyid.
Bismillah ar-Rahman ar-Rahim. Thank you very much. Here I to put regarding the stance of Ahlus Sunnah, when we find and when we go into, more deeper to understand the stance and the mawqif of Ahlus Sunnah with regard to Bab Fatima, I found 3 types of reactions, behavior, and interpretations. The first one is just simple rejection. So nothing had happened and everything is the fabrication of Rawafid. And this is a biased view. Obviously, we cannot discuss here in the Majlis of Ahlul Ilm. This is the first behavior and, attitude. And the second behavior is this is just acceptance, but there is an interpretation, and rejection as well. With regard to the incident of isqat or physical attack of the door of Fatima, breaking it, or the case of miscarriage, this is rejected unanimously. And even by muhaqqiqeen as well, I coming to, later, and I think Shaykh Muhammad Umar Ramadhan, he has highlighted, excellently, right? And the second one, this is accept, because there are 3 types of narrations. The first one is the physical attack and the incident of miscarriage. This is rejected unanimously, not accepted, because there is no mention in any authentic book of history or hadith, presented by or produced by Ahlus Sunnah. Second one is another incident, as quoted by At-Tabari, many other historians, the Umar bin Khattab, he took some woods and the fire and he threatened, but he never entered into the house. The third one is a simple visit of Umar bin Khattab, the second caliph. He simply visited the house as narrated by Musannif ibn Abi Shayba, and later on many muhaddiseen of Ahlus Sunnah. I'm going through that. Then I have to, present the simple interpretation, how they interpreted this. The incident is that when after the demise of the Holy Prophet, Imam Ali and Hazrat Zubair, both of them, they would hold the meetings in the house of Sayyeda Fatima to Zahra. When it came to the knowledge of the second caliph, Hazrat Umar bin Khattab, so he became angry and he personally visited the house of Fatima and said to her, Ya binta Rasulullah, O daughter of the messenger of God, and no one is more dearer to me in this world than your father and yourself. But if these men he meant Imam Ali and Zubair, continued holding the meeting in your house, then I may burn this house. So when they later on they came to the house of Hazrat Fatima, Imam Ali and Hazrat Zubair, Sayyida Fatima informed them about the visit of Umar and his statements, and finally she said he might materialize what he said, right? So this is the incident which is interpreted by first of all, I have to go through the sources. Musannaf ibn Abi Shayba, and this sanad, this narration is confirmed, right, by Asma al-Rijal as well, and very soon I have to quote some of them. Then it's also Sahih Muslim in Kitabul Fitan wa Ashratus Sa'a, right? He also mentioned and authenticated the sanad as well. Imam Ahmad bin Hanbal in Fada'ilus Sahaba, volume 1, also quoted this episode, the simple visit, and by confirming the narrators as well. Hafiz ibn Abdul Barr in Al-Istiyafi Asma al-Ashab in volume 1 also confirmed and also authenticated the sanad as well. From Asma al-Rijal, Hafiz ibn Hajar, Fathul Bari fi Sharh al-Bukhari 6, volume 6, he also mentioning this visit of the second caliph and also confirming the sanad of this incident, and also in Tahzib al-Tahzib. Hafiz al-Zahabi in Siyar A'lam al-Nubala, volume 6. Then Abul Walid Sulaiman bin Khalaf al-Yaji, and in his book At-Ta'dil wa Tajreel liman kharaja lahu al-Bukhari fil Jami' al-Sahih. So also, he authenticated the sanad as well and quoted this incident. Allama Badruddin al-Aini uses Maghan al-Ahyar fi Sharh Asami Rijal Ma'an al-Azhar in his first volume, and Tahzibul Kamal fi Asma' al-Rijal, Hafiz Yusuf al-Mazi, and also Khatib al-Baghdadi in Tarikh Madinatus Salam in volume 6. He also performed the tawthiq, authenticated. But all these sources are narrated to one single, riwayah, which is not talking about the incident of the fire, taking the fire there, and not isqat, miscarriage or physical attack. Only personal, simple visit he visited. And there are two types of interpretation. This is the first stance, and these are Ahlul Ilm people. To them, Hazrat Umar Raziyallahu Anhu, he did realize a sense of the disunity among Muslim Islamic community soon after the Holy Prophet. And he did have in his mind the importance of the unity, and he thought and feared these type of the meetings between Imam Ali and Hazrat Zubair, because until that time, and they never accepted the authority of the first caliph, he thought and feared it might lead to the source of discord, rift, and disunity. And because Hazrat Umar was very tough in his personal, natural behavior, so that's why, however, apparently his act or his statement to Sayyida Fatima, that's are hard or some extent harsh as well. But inside there was respect as well, because he said, you are more dearer to me, nearer to me, and your father than anything else in this world. So that was a respect. So we have to look at the intention, sincerely intention of Hazrat Umar. So that's why he never meant what he said. He never meant, and in future, and he was going to burn down the house of the Fatima. That was his nature, because in some of the other cases he had been very, very tough as well, right? So this is, justification. So they accepted this simple narration, simple visit, and this is the interpretation of the second view. And the third view is actually, that's the one which is related to the proper, highly Ahlul Ilm people, academic people, right? But this is also related to the third one, his personal or the simple visit, house of Sayyida Fatima Zahra, right? And to them, these people, and I think I'm with them as well, my view,
Dr. Khalid, if I could ask you to just summarize, because a few other people want to comment as well, please.
All right, very shortly. All right. To these people, the third party, they're just, this act of Hazrat Umar should be viewed in the perspective of his some previous acts. In the case of, for example, Hadith al-Qirtas, when he stopped the wasiyah of the Holy Prophet, in the perspective of Hajj Tamattu, because he stopped Hajj Tamattu when he was differed by many companions, including Imam Ali, Muaz bin Jabal, especially his own son Abdullah bin Umar, he differed as well. So because he was by nature very tough, and sometimes his acts, they are very, very exclusive. So that's why this is one of them as well, like Hajj Tamattu and like Hadith Qirtas, right? So this happened, we have to accept, because so many narrations they are there, and we are in no position to justify, and we have to differ, and he was differed in this case by Sahaba as well, right? That's all from me.
Thank you so much. So I'm going to let Sheikh Muhammad Umar come back on that in a moment. So as we approach 5 o'clock, which is our close, I'll give both Sheikh Vinay and Sheikh Umar a chance to make some final comments or respond to some of these questions which are coming now. So we'll move now to our dear brother, who's very welcome for the first time, Sayyid Ali Imran. He's one of the outstanding students of Qom at the moment, who writes extensively in English, and many people are benefiting from his contributions across the world. So welcome for the first time to one of our CIMS meetings, and please, you're welcome to make your comments or contributions.
Assalamu alaikum. Can you guys hear me?
We can hear you very clearly.
So, first of all, thank you for facilitating this discussion, very important discussion. Hopefully we can have a few more sessions on this topic, because there's a lot of angles we haven't really opened up. I just have a question or sort of a comment for both Sheikh Umar and also Sheikh Vinay. And that's, look, at the end of the day, we're talking about a historical incident, an historical event. So to bring in certain, notions of hujjiyah, or, it doesn't have any meaning when it comes to establishing an historical event. Are there any discussions or books or articles written by Muslim scholars, whether amongst the Ahlul Sunnah or the Ahlul Shia, which discuss, first of all, historical methodology? Okay, what are the lawabit? What is the lawabit in going and establishing, first of all, a historical event? We know when we read Usul al-Fiqh in the Bahs of Ta'aruz, there are murajjihat. We bring preference indicators by which we, for example, weigh certain narrations, and so on. Because for Sheikh Umar, I want to ask him that, does he not, by the way, so I'm assuming both sides at the very least agree that something occurred, and the dispute now is over the details. And the Ahlul Sunnah scholars are saying that we do not believe any of the details occurred, while the Shi'i position is that no, some of the details that, for example, the burning of the door seems to have occurred. But the question here is, so for example, for the Ahlul Sunnah scholars, is that, are there not any murajjihat in the books of the Ahlul Sunnah that they could use to say that, look, even some of the details could be reliable? Because, for example, when did a mere irsal in a historical event, mean that didn't take place? Is that a law bit that we use to establish historical incidents? As soon as the riwayah is mursal, that's it didn't take place. So, what are the dawabit? Are there, so this idea of tajmi' al-qara'in that we use? And on the contrary, to Sheikh Vinay, I want to ask him, are there also not qara'in to indicate perhaps the weakness of some of the details? Because Sheikh Vinay mentioned, for example, there are 339 reports. I mean, I haven't, gone through these, these reports, but I highly doubt these are independent sources. I'm guessing a lot of them are just, quoting Sulaim, for example, or quoting Ayashi or whoever. Or, for example, the presence of some of the details in Al-Ikhtisas or Dalail al-Imama. I mean, the books themselves are very, very dubious. There's, research by even, contemporary scholars like Hassan Ansari and so on that show that, perhaps Al-Ikhtisas was just a book of notebooks. Different muballighin of that time would come and just, record certain details that they would narrate off the pulpits. Or, for example, the absence. So, it's interesting because Sheikh Vinay mentioned the quote from Sheikh Tusi that there's the ittifaq of the Shia, but, in the isqat of Muhsin. But, there is this ibara from Sheikh Mufid in Al-Irshad, which some have used to say that maybe Sheikh Mufid himself didn't believe that there was a child named Muhsin. So like these type of reports. And by the way, I understand the time was short, and maybe these discussions were covered. But I want to ask both the Sheikh Umar and Sheikh Vinay, are there not qara'in so for the Ahl Sunnah to say that look, some of the details could be proven and established? And on the other hand, to the Shi'i scholars, that are there not qara'in? Because at the end of the day, can we really reject that there was no motivation amongst the Shi'i trends in Kufa especially to fabricate something against the Khulafa, especially after the Kaysani movements? I feel like without looking at these trends, without looking at these makatib and what was going on, it's very difficult to just take a report, a sentence, and say, okay, well, this is what happened, this is what not happened. And just a final point to what Sheikh Arif had mentioned in the beginning about the Khutbatul Fadak. Over there, once again, there is some recent research that has been done to show even the qara'in of wadah, fabrication over there by Abu al-Aina and al-Jahiz, acknowledging that the khutbah is first found in Balaghatun Nisa by Ibn Abi Tayfur, who's the adib in the Abbasid court. So there is some research, some room to look into those discussions as well before we can use that as a qarina over here to establish something occurred. So that's what I had to say regarding the dhawabit and how can we establish or prove use the qara'in to establish certain details or not. Because I think that's where the discussion is at this point.
Thank you.
Details.
I think you've made some excellent comments and very pointed comments. So very much appreciate your contributions here. So I'll ask you in turn to respond as briefly as you can, actually, because now we are coming towards a close. And maybe that's a very useful question to help us move towards a conclusion. So maybe Sheikh Omar, I'll come to you first, please. And in a sense, this links to some of Dr. Khalid's questions as well. If I understood Dr. Khalid correctly, he's asking us to look at the context of some of Hazrat Umar's previous activities. Could we read these reports in light of some of those previous activities, which you or have also alluded to accepting have occurred? So please, Sheikh Umar.
Bismillah ar-Rahman. First of all, Jazakallah khairan to you and Jazakallah khairan to CIMS for organizing this program. May Allah reward you immensely, and thank you for all the scholars and the participants. Very quickly, in regards to what the noble Sheikh said, who studied in Qum, about Irsal and about whether we can take Mursal, the view within the Usuliyun, within the Ahl Sunnah, is that Mursal narrations cannot be taken. If it's in regards to an incident that took place, that you cannot narrate directly that the person saw such a thing. The only person that accepted it was Abu Hanifa rahimahullah ta'ala. But Abu Hanifa rahmatullah alayhi gives a precondition, or he stipulates an extra condition, which is that whoever is the final narrator of the incident that took place, he must be a tabi'i and cannot be a taba tabi'in. He must be someone who physically met and sat with the Sahaba. And there's a massive debate regarding that. And yes, we should contextualize.
Can I just stop you one sec, Sheikh, just for clarity for the people who have had their training in usul al-fiqh has been from a Shia perspective. Is this for the istinbat al-ahkam al-fiqh, or is this on historical matters more generally? Because specifically within, I think this is where the question was coming from, is to say, okay, such conditions of, dropping irsal and mursal traditions may be extremely relevant when it comes to identifying or fi amaliyat al-istinbat al-ahkam al-shar. But is it the same thing when it comes to historical events?
This is the general view across the board amongst Ahl Sunnah. Abu Hanifa gave a number of, you can refer to Al-Mabsut by Imam Sarakhsi. He debates this in great detail in volume 3, page number 395. Al-Mabsut, rahmatullah alayhi, he goes in that book. However, what I would say, just to conclude, is we also, and I agree, we have to look at everything at a 360 perspective. Sheikh Khalid mentioned some things. Also, we have to look at that after this incident, what was the relationship between the Ahlul Bayt and Umar radiallahu anhu? What was the relationship? If such an unimaginable event took place of the killing of Sayyeda Fatima, I don't think that would be a cordial relationship. There would be animosity, like we have the animosity and the opposition between Muawiyah and Imam Ali. It lasted till the end. It had some opposition towards it and Marwan and so forth. So we have to look at everything from all different perspectives. But again, I'm not denying that something did take place. What I'm denying specifically, and I should have maybe highlighted it more in more clarity, is the physical attack I don't believe took place. That's my view. Wallahu a'lam.
Thank you so much. Sheikh Vinay, please. So if you want to respond to Sayyid Ali's question and make some concluding comments. You're on mute.
Yeah, you can hear me now. Yeah, so I discussed this in my research, in my dissertation, that it is very well possible that some of these traditions came from the Kaysani and Jarudi movements of the 3rd century. That is always a possibility. And I mean, you know, that is, and the same thing goes towards certain miraculous attributes of the Imams as well. It depends on what school of camp of textual criticism we fall into in that regard. So I do discuss that in my academic research. Now, as for the reports themselves, you know, I don't think there's a way we could say that they are so strong that is a, you know, that it's a form of it's a part of the durudiyat of tashayyu, and you know, I don't think so. However, that being said, the riwayat themselves, leaving aside the turuq of the kutub, but the riwayat themselves, many of them seem to be musnad, and they seem to go back to the imams, to very prominent companions who are not accused of ghulu. And that's something that needs to be looked at and needs to be dealt with. I don't think we can just throw the baby out with the bathwater here and say that because there was ghulu in the 2nd century, and the development of anti-Sahaba sentiment was there, thus the traditions about the martyrdom of Sayyidah Zahra, it can be attributed to the Ghulat or to those groups. I think that tends to be a general kind of paint that's thrown on, but when you go into the very intimate, very specific details, perhaps it is true. I don't deny that. It all depends on our epistemological position on these issues. And so there are definitely some qara'in that could indicate a weakness of the traditions, and then there are definitely qara'in that indicate that it is possible that these things happened, or at least in Shi'i memory they seem to have happened in the aqwal of the scholars, in the aqwal in the ahadith. And at the end of the day, I think that, yes, this is a very controversial issue, and I don't think it can be reconciled. I mean, in terms of these two ideas kind of coming together, the only way it can be by denying that it was just a threat, and then it never went past that, and then that's possible to reconcile. But for the early Shi'i scholars, I don't think they could do that. Even Mufid in Kitab al-Jaman and Amali includes certain traditions to a certain effect, to this effect as well. But definitely it is an area of controversy, and in my written research, I've never claimed that it is authentic. That is beyond doubt authentic. But certainly there is a strong preponderance of evidence from the Shi'i school, and a very strong preponderance of evidence that in their viewpoint, something vociferous happened to Fatima.
Okay, thank you so much. Okay, to both of our speakers and to those who have contributed and you know, those who have listened. I know this format isn't as conducive as us being around a table, you know, at the Institute, and inshallah we pray that we can sit around the table and soon, inshallah, again. So it kind of falls on me to make some concluding comments and try to draw some things together. I can see some hands up, so apologies now, I won't take any more final comments from others. But you know, in this process, of course, we recognize that the aim of CIMS is to have mutual understanding, okay, and to improve relations. So I think at the very least, because there's clear recognition this is such a sensitive issue, which deserves further analysis, which deserves further questions, which deserves deeper understanding. But I think at the very least, we should recognize that there is basis for this emotive response to the situation around Hazrat Fatima. One of the biggest points of tensions, which we know and we have discussed before, around the CIMS table has been the criticism of the Sahaba coming from Shia communities and from Shia scholars. And if we recognize, as both scholars have today, that there is source material, which speaks of such an event in Sunni sources and Shia sources, whether the event happened or not, we can at least understand the level of emotion around such issues. And I think that is actually a platform, to move towards better relationships, even if it's a very humble step. Beyond that, in terms of the specific contributions, both scholars have recognized that there is source material within Shia sources, within Sunni sources, amongst some of the earliest Muslim literature. There is sources which refer to this incident, to some sort of hostile encounter. Of course, the strength of this material and the details with which it contains is the point of contention. And that's where we come to the disagreement. We can see quite clearly that amongst the Ahl Sunnah, as Dr. Khalid pointed out, and Shaykh Umar in his detailed paper, there are differences of views regarding the strength of this material. Shaykh Umar mentioned how some of these reports come in some of the strongest of the Sunni works, yet in his view, they are rejected on the basis of the arguments which he made. First and foremost, because in his view, it would, if this material is substantiated, it would be a justifiable basis for the condemnation of the second Khalif. In Shaykh Umar's view, accordingly, the strength of the evidence has to be sufficient, to establish such a huge claim amongst the Ahl Sunnah. For the Shia position, they recognize that this tradition is there. Many Shia scholars have said that the ahadith is sound, and the details are not contested. Although, the claim of tawatur has not been mentioned at all, and some of our final comments have been very, very pertinent in terms of what was the broader context, both for establishing that something did happen. Both speakers have mentioned it. The broader context of Saqifa, of course, the foregoing of the rights of Hazrat Fatima to Fadak. To what extent did this help us understand, the particular details of the event? I think our final contributor asked us, I think very wisely, to look at the broader context to try to understand these details better. The details, to what extent we can have a firm picture on them, will always be open to question depending on our epistemological basis. Whether it's the confidence in the jarh and ta'deel process, which Shaykh Umar has pointed out to us, or whether it is the historicity of these sources which we need to turn to, is, if you like, an open argument. A final point of agreement which seems to have emerged is that both speakers in different ways refer to the conduct of Imam Ali, salamullahi alayhi, in responding to these questions. Although both speakers, Shaykh Umar and Shaykh Vinay, gave different interpretations of this conduct. Shaykh Umar raised it as a question. What was Imam Ali's response to this particular situation? Shaykh Vinay responded in saying that his practice was sabr. Look, I think we're quite clear that establishing the details of exactly what happened unequivocally to the satisfaction of both Sunni and Shia, is maybe an impossible task. What we can be clear upon, and I think what we do agree upon, was the ethic of the Ahl al-Bayt post this event. And we see quite clearly that Imam Ali salamullahi alayhi, did support, did engage, with the Sahabas after this event. And if on that note, although it may not be satisfactory, and I think the call for further sessions on this issue is very, very important, but alhamdulillah, we managed to begin such a conversation on such a sensitive issue, I think is, in my view, a success. So I'll end with some words which are attributed to Imam Ali in Shia sources, on the authority of the Prophet himself. And we find versions of this hadith, across our sources, Sunni and Shia, that to mend your relationships, Islah that bayin, is afdala min amat as-salati was-sawm, can be better than the ordinary or the mustahab, salat and sawm. This is something we accept across our traditions, and I commend you all for your patience and your participation, and we pray we may have more such events to better our understanding and opportunities to work with each other for the sake of the broader good. Walhamdulillahi Rabbil Alameen. There is a feedback form which has been posted on the chat group. Yeah, we would be delighted to receive your feedback. And I, with sincere apologies, those who attend these events regularly would know sometimes the best conversations we have are after this formal session. So we hope that we can have more opportunities to meet together, to learn from each other beyond these historical differences so that we can work together for each other's benefit. Thank you so much. We look forward to hosting you at CIMS meetings again in the future. And my deepest gratitude to both our speakers, Shaykh Umar and Shaykh Vinay, and our co-host, Dr. Khalid.
Thank you.
Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullah.